Bitcoin crashed over 10%, taking a lot of cryptocurrencies with it, going down 10 to 20%. However, we have seen a rebound today. So does this spark the end of a flash crash, or are we just beginning? Let's have a look at that in today's video. Update where we currently sit in the macro markets, looking at the S&P and the NASDAQ, as they are now looking like they're putting in intermediate tops at all-time high prices. I've got a ton of data to get through with you guys, so make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's dive in. In this video, I want to give you some actionable points. I want to show you some price targets to have a look at in case we are correcting. Now, we have focused on the top of Bitcoin for many weeks now, and it has not gone any further. So pay particular attention to where Bitcoin currently sits in the cycle, and if the markets are giving us any signals that it can't go any further, at least for the short term. There is a mass of ETF hype at the moment, yet the price is struggling. It doesn't seem like that for the majority, but it looks like it is struggling based on the charts. All I want to show you today is the facts from the chart. So let's dive in and have a look at what happened for 2023 so that it can give us some insights into where we are going next, or potentially going, because at the end of the day, none of us know for sure what is happening on that right-hand side, that black area of the chart. What we try to do is be detectives and figure out to the best way possible, throwing the probabilities on our side, hopefully, if we can get to the point of knowing what might happen next. So for 2023, we know that it seemed like one of the worst years in history. The media was throwing everything at us. The market was up 160% for Bitcoin, and it was also up for the S&P 500. It was up for the NASDAQ. It was up for the Dow Jones, going right back from the first of the year to one of the last days of the year. There were barely any days down. If you just bought at the beginning and held to the end, it was a up year. But the ride along the way is tricky. That's essentially what happens in the market. So what we try to do is take away that emotion of the ride. And for the majority, they want to be involved in the emotion of the ride because it's your hard-earned money. Whenever you put your money down for something, you want to feel something. For trading and investing, it is the exact opposite. If you feel something, you're doing something wrong. Try not to feel, just focus on the charts and leave the feelings for when you make the profit so you can go and spend it in real life. This is how we get caught up every single cycle, and that's how the altcoin market takes most of the gains. So the pure facts for 2023 was that it was an easy year, straight up. That's it, 160% for BTC. Now, this is presented in the data here, and the interesting facts about having such an easy year is that the next year typically is not as easy, and the next year is now. It's 2024. And so I've put up a few forecasts for this year, just looking at some of the low areas where the market might not drop back to. So we are focusing on the Bitcoin crash and what comes next, but we need to understand where the macro cycle currently sits. And so within this particular forecast, I think the first half is going to be the tricky part of the year, the first half of 2024. Now that might spill over into quarter three as well, and this goes for the stock markets and for Bitcoin. Try and hear me clearly here. I don't want to get too confused. But we do have to expect, at least I think, that the first half is going to be a little bit trickier than what the masses think it is. And what I'm seeing and feeling from the masses because of the news headlines is that the ETF is here to stay and the prices should not go back under $40,000 and that we are just going to skyrocket to new fresh highs. I'm not sure that's going to be the case, but I think we will get something much easier in the second half of the year when the bullish sentiment re-enters the market in a bigger way, which spurs us on to hope and optimism. So that's what I think is coming next. But what can we do practically, and what is the rest of the data showing us here? So in terms of the years for the S&P 500, we are looking at the years where there have been number of negative year-to-date closes, and the next year, what happens in that next year after negative year-to-date closes. So essentially 2022, something we can remember, had a lot of negative closes, number of negative year-to-date closes. Okay, so 248, and that means the next year was going to be much easier, which was 2023. and the market basically went straight up from that point. So straight down in 2022, straight up in 2023. Yes, there were a few corrections along the way, and they were significant corrections, but at the end of the day, it was basically a straight up year. And so what we're seeing now for 2024 could potentially be a big year of negative year-to-date closes. And that could then spin at the end of the year where we start to get some of those positives. So all I'm saying here is that the first half could be quite tricky, and that could spill over into Bitcoin and cryptos, even though the sentiment is quite high at the moment for Bitcoin and cryptos. Everyone is excited about the ETF. We had the rumors of it coming out early. We had the rumors of it being denied. And now the market sits, as I'm recording this, at roughly $44,000. And in the short term, we are seeing some pretty significant red days for the S&P 500 and for the NASDAQ. We have seen 1, 2, 3, 4 red days in a row. So this is a major warning sign. Members, TIA members, know about this particular signal. If you're not using it, throw it into your toolbox of trading and investing. When you start to see this at the end of major runs, it is a telltale sign that the trend could be changing for at least the intermediate term. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't see the price run back up and quickly test those prices, but this on its own, at least 3 days down from a major move, is a very significant sign, at least an early sign of the trends changing. Remember, trends changing does not mean straight down, straight away. It can still test those higher prices. And I've got this part circled just to give you an indication of that as well. So this could be, or was, a distribution, a short-term distribution, because you can see it was after a very significant move to the upside. Then you had a very significant correction. And well, after that point, we skyrocketed from there. But of course, this was extreme fear from the markets. There was a lot of talk about interest rates and inflation. And then we had the war breakout in the Middle East, all sorts of things, right? The main thing I want to point out here is that you can still test the prices to the upside or get very, very close, like you could see here on that lower high before the market starts to fall. And then you can see your multiple red days following from there. But essentially right now, we may have put in an intermediate top and the markets need some time to digest this move that happened very, very fast from the October low. And then also basically the entire move from October 2022 to December of 2023. The same deal goes for the NASDAQ. You've had 1, 2, 3, 4 days down. Yes, there is 5 red days, but we are only focused on lower highs, lower lows. This red day is a higher high, higher low, looking at the prices. So don't get those confused just because TradingView shows it like that. So these are the big days here. We had many days in a row of lower highs, lower lows, straight down. So if we're looking for price targets now, and we've talked a lot about timing already, this first half of the year could be tricky, and tricky means up, down, and sideways without having a clear direction. That's essentially tricky. So from here, price targets to the downside, we're looking at roughly 15,600. And I'll get to Bitcoin in just a moment, but we just need to pay attention to these to help us give some timing for Bitcoin. If we start to see the stock markets bottom and put in some support, then maybe we could be turning the corner for Bitcoin as well as that risk starts to come back into the game. All right, so for the S&P 500, that level is 4482, so call it 4,500 for a round number. And for the NASDAQ, we're looking at 15,600. There are numbers further down, but we're just going to focus on those two until we get to them. So if we get to those points, then we can start to look at the numbers a little further down. So we now have a grounding for the stock markets. What we think is happening based on the data and based on the charts, what those signals are coming up as in the short term, the intermediate, and then our overall macro picture, as we still expect the markets to be skyrocketing over the next couple of years. But in the meantime, in the shorter term, we could see some tricky market action because the markets have been so easy in 2023. And I say easy based on the chart, essentially buying and then selling at the end of the year. As an example, it's basically been straight up. It's been straight up for all the markets, even though for the media and for most of us, it hasn't seemed that easy. So to the broader picture, looking at the Bitcoin cycle, we are still in the green stage here. We're still in the first half of the overall bull market cycle. The main thing I want to look at here is it's a rough 35 months from the bottom to the top. That was the 2016-17 cycle. That was the 2019-2021 cycle. And now we start the 23, 24, potentially 2025 cycle, right? So where we currently sit is 14 months from that low. So 14 months from the low, looking at the previous cycle, it was in the midst of a correction. So it hadn't gotten ready to go on that next major move. It's had a pretty significant run up, and then it had a pullback, another little bit of a burst before a second pullback. Look back to the previous cycle, it had gone through an accumulation to 3 before the breakout of the 50% level. But in terms of the pullbacks, well, you've got another pullback in that 14-month period. So far, we've really seen one significant pullback period, and then the March quick correction before it took off again. So we've seen one, maybe we're in the midst of the second. We haven't seen the top yet. We haven't seen the pullback yet. So it could be early and maybe too early to call, but we still remain vigilant at these times after markets have been up for 14 months without a correction over 25%. So how does this happen in markets? Besides the technical structure, the support and resistance, watching our Gann lines, watching our significant swing tops on the monthly chart, all that sort of technical stuff, in terms of the market sentiment, and so far we've been reading it pretty well here on the channel. You guys have been following, you guys have been also picking up on it and using it to your own advantage as well. We can see that we have been going through a disbelief to the upside. Remember when we first posted this back here? It's all on Twitter. You can see those posts. We were looking at this being disbelief running up, and then we had that small pullback here. Then we saw more disbelief to the upside. Meanwhile, the majority were looking at it being the basis of anger and coming out of anger before it dropped into depression. That was the main thought process at that time. And they were basically one step behind. I find the market is typically one step behind what is actually going on pretty much all the time, at least one step, sometimes two steps. There's still a lot calling for major downside at this point. We think that's not going to happen based on what we've shown you here on the channel already. So we need to get to those price targets and the timing of this as well after this flash crash from yesterday. Congrats to you guys who are not getting caught up in the titles. I'm just a player in the game. Let's focus on where we go here with the Wall Street cheat sheet. So essentially, I think we've had a first disbelief based on what we noticed in the market at the time. We've had a depression, and now we're going through, or we are into this disbelief, which could potentially turn into hope. So maybe we're in this hope stage and we're just going to have the pullback. Could be the pullback into another disbelief, or it could just be a hold up here and a consolidation. Time will tell, and we'll continue to focus on what the charts are telling us at the stage. After hope comes optimism, belief, thrill, euphoria, and I think those are going to be reserved for the second half of 2024 and into 2025. There's still a fair bit to go in this cycle, as we've been looking at with the timing of it. We're roughly 14 months into a 35-month cycle. It's basically 3 years up, 1 year down. Or a better way to look at it, and I want to try to get that out of our minds of must be 3 up, 1 down, a 4-year cycle of a low to a low, because this top eventually, somewhere down the line, will probably come early and you'll get a longer bear market. Think about that. It's still a 4-year cycle, but the top might come earlier, and that will throw a lot of people out. Yes, I know some people think it's going to come earlier this time around. I don't think that's the case based on everything else I've shown you here with the stock markets and with the macro cycle probably coming to a peak sometime mid this decade before we get a collapse later this decade. That leads us on to the next piece of macro info here, looking at the 50% level for BTC. Now we've followed the market down, we've got our range intact here, so that's our full bear market range, and now we split that in half using the linear scale. It looks out of whack here, bigger bottom, bigger top, throw it onto linear, you can see that it is exactly 50-50. So let's get those off. We've got 50-50. Typically in the past, the market has tested it and then failed. Tested it and then a smaller fail before we go on a bigger run. So that was the last cycle. Now, you know, you've seen me talk about this many times on the channel, but just to give you another brief understanding in case you were new here, this particular move has happened on each of those previous occasions, each of the previous cycles, looking at the market come up, test 50%, get rejected, and then break through on that second time. It doesn't have to get rejected in a big way the second time around, as you can see here from this cycle, but essentially you can see it break through on the second time after that first test. And when does it break through? 22 months from the low. So 22 months from the low, did it the last cycle again. 22 months from the low. Now, I'm not counting on it to be exactly 22 months each time. That's only 2 data points, but it's pretty interesting that it happened both occasions already in the past. So if it did happen again for a third time at exactly the 22 months, as I said, I don't think it's going to happen exactly. Could be wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong there. Well, that would take us to roughly September of 2024, which throws us into that second half of the year. But how is that helping us right now? What about Bitcoin right now? Well, I think we're at this first stage here, this first attempt at 50%. And what we could see in the past, you can see that the market ran up, went above the 50% and closed underneath it. Then the second month, it ran up, tested it again, and closed beneath it. The third month, it ran up and hit 50% again, and then closed beneath it. So this time around, we've hit it, and we close almost dead on 50%. So this month January still has 27 days to go, which means we could still close underneath this level. And it would be similar to what happened in 2019 and similar to what happened in 2016. One test, close under, another test, and then we finally had time to break through. So from the macro, we move to the micro. Now, this is the Wyckoff chart that we looked at way back here, just 2 days ago before the market collapsed, as things were seeming a little bit spicy at the top, at least in my opinion. So we've seen the market correct down now to 40K, 41,000, and that could put us into this phase D. Now, we haven't seen the next move down, and we haven't seen these lows broken convincingly, and that's what I'm waiting for. I want to see at least this trading range here get taken out before I call it a phase D, because for all we know, this could be just an up thrust in a phase B, and then we move into the phase C, and then we get the move down. So it hasn't happened just yet, but they're starting to build upon the evidence to show that maybe we are moving into a phase D. Now, I bring this up because we have had a pretty significant bounce to the upside since that low yesterday. And this looked pretty similar when we go back to July of 2024. So remember, we're just trying to act like detectives here in the market. Check out how this market ran up, had a pretty big correction, and then for the next 3 days, it came back to test those highs again, but did not get back to that top. And then it finally fell out of bed. So it took from the 27th of July to the 2nd of August before it broke down that low that was put in on that flash crash. Think about that for a moment as we come back to where BTC stands from the 3rd. If it happened to be 2, 3, 4, 5 trading days after the 3rd, that could really line us up pretty well with the ETF announcement news. Remember, the ETF was supposedly going to be announced, whether it's approved or denied, around the 5th to the 10th. And that pretty much lines us up with the beginning of that time frame, around the 8th. It could happen sooner, maybe it happens later. Obviously, I don't have those answers. All I have is the detective work here. I don't know when the murder is going to happen, but I am watching for when the murder happens. And I'm leaning towards a murder happening, more so because of the signals and the clues that the market is giving us. At the end of the day, I can always be wrong because I do not have the answers to the right-hand side, the black space here. It's still a mystery, and hopefully we can uncover this mystery over the next couple of days. Some more clues to this mystery going back to the macro here. We're looking at how far the market has moved up, and it's been 4 months to the upside. Now, if it does correct, and there's all these ifs, if it does, the downside, so far, we've only seen 2 months, 60 days. So roughly 30 to 60 days is all the market has given us to the downside when Bitcoin corrects. Look at the previous bull markets as well, going back from the cycle low, there is your peak. The most it had was a 6-month period, but remember this was a huge move to the upside, all in one go, 6 months up, 6 months back. So barring that particular one, you had 1 month, 1 month, 2 months, and then you even had 2 months at the start of the bear market. Going back to the previous cycle, 1 month, 1 month, 2 months, half a month, 1 month. So basically, within that 30 to 60 days from the turn is potentially all the market will give us. It's not a hard and fast, it must be like this. It could go out to the 3 months, but we're just going to focus on that 30, 60, 90-day period once this turn comes in. So that clock countdown begins when this swing chart turns down. Pay particular attention to your swing chart. If you have it, the TIA Gann swing indicator, there is a link in the top of the video description. Now, I've looked a lot at time targets for the downside for BTC, looking at the next 30, 60, 90 days from when the top comes in. What about the price targets? Well, we've covered these multiple times, looking at 20 to 22% downside. But the next big one, if in fact the 46K is the top, is to measure down to the 50% level. And that level comes out at $35,000. So it's a nice clean area to keep in mind. Could the market come back down and test the previous tops of 32K? It is a possibility. It's only 32% down from the current top. But I think if you're going to leave your stops only at 32K, those entry triggers that you're looking for, you might not get filled, and you could be a little bit upset with the market not getting into that. So it's important to possibly scale your entries on the way down. Maybe have some a little higher, roughly at 20 or 22% down from the top at 36 to 37. Have a few more at 35 and 34. And for that lucky all Hail Mary best entry, maybe somewhere around 31, 32, 33. But this middle area is probably where the market wants to come and retest. And if you want to be super safe, then you would just look to those previous highs at roughly $38,000. Now we have one more chart to look at. We're looking at Ethereum in this case, because for these altcoins, many could be coming towards the end of that accumulation move in the next couple of months. So what we're looking at here for ETH is a breakdown of the support. It's almost happened exactly the same as last cycle. It seems so crazy that it can happen exactly the same. But when you put together some of the market sentiment and how people miss what's going on because of different news headlines and unprecedented events, in this case, the ETF and all sorts of things, then you can start to see how these patterns play out time and time again, because the majority aren't watching charts. And it's pretty hard, I think, to believe what you're seeing in front of your eyes, especially when you start out, that it could be rhyming and almost repeating exactly the same as the previous cycle. So we're just looking at ETH here, not to get too carried away with how things repeat in cycles here. Could be at this stage here, this breakdown of the USD low for ETH in this case. So we might only have a couple more months left before we find that bottom of ETH BTC. Then there's the accumulation, the breakout, a new all-time high for Bitcoin, and then the markets go crazy. So it's just another indicator in my toolbox that shows me a timing of how these markets might play out over the next 6 months and then over the next 12 months. We still might have a few hard times ahead, a few shaky movements before we get into that easier stage again, where basically everything goes up altogether. And as we said at the beginning, there could be a big reason for that, because 2023 was very easy. It was very much straight up for the markets, Bitcoin, stock markets, US, looking at the S&P, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones. Most markets around the world were basically straight up, and that could lead to a bit of a tricky first half of 2024. Thanks again, guys. Hit the like and subscribe. Share it with a friend. It's our road to 400,000 in 2024. I'll see you at the next video. Till then, take care and peace out.